Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about magnums. An informal definition of magnums is unusually great in a power or size. And that sums up the magnums that we're going to talk about today. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Coffee and Cartridges. Today we're going to talk about the granddaddies of all Magnum cartridges. I guess I should say most Magnum cartridges. But you'll be shocked if you don't know already when I go over all the cartridges from today that are based off of these three cartridges from the past. I think you'll be shocked at how many there are. But first, let's set the stage. Let's go back to the end of the 19th century into the 20th century. Some incredible advancements in firearms technology has taken place. The French have come up with smokeless powder and the Spitzer or pointed bullet. Mauser in Germany has perfected his rifle, and it's the Mauser 98 rifle. And a huge number of countries in the world have adopted that rifle as their military service rifle or a copy of it, including the US. With the 1903 Springfield. The U.S. also creates the 30-06 from the 7x57 Mauser. Well, around this same time, at the beginning of the 20th century, Britain still had an empire, and they still had colonies over in Africa. It wouldn't be till the 50s and 60s where they started to decolonize. A big industry of the time was safari hunting. People with means to do so would travel to Africa to hunt plains game, but especially dangerous game. And so there was several companies over in Britain that would produce rifles and cartridges for this task. Specifically, Wesley Richards, Jeffery, Holland Holland, and Rigby. I will put on the screen now the four cartridges that I'll start out by talking about before I get to just three. These four cartridges are the 425 Wesley Richards, the 404 Jeffery, the 375 Holland Holland, and the 416 Rigby. All produced between 1905 and say 1912, all with a little bit different design philosophy on the same application, dangerous game hunting in Africa. Now the 425 Wesley Richards seemed like a great cartridge, and it did well, but it really doesn't have tremendous lineage that takes us to our modern day, so there's really not a whole lot to talk about. Except for one thing, I do want to point out a mistake I've made. In the past, I made the honest statement that I believed, as far as I knew, the 284 Winchester was the first cartridge with a rebated rim. Well, I stand corrected. That is not true. There was actually several, and one of them, possibly the first, but one of them was the 425 Wesley Richards. It did have a rebated rim, as you can see here. So I was wrong about that, and I will correct myself. But as far as I can tell, great cartridge, great company, but there's really not a whole lot more to say. Now the other three cartridges, the 404 Jeffery, the 375 Holland Holland, and the 416 Rigby have a tremendous history. A lot of cartridges have been based off of these original Magnum cartridges. Let me back up for 1 second and say this. These are not the original Magnum cartridges. In fact, people were hunting in Africa for many years before this with a lot of your Nitro Express cartridges using black powder. And really these newer, modern at that time, cartridges were designed to get similar performance, if not better, with more modern touches and with smokeless powder and Spitzer bullets. Also using more modern rifles like we talked about, especially Rigby with the Mauser rifle. Let's stop for 1 second and just kind of take a little bit of an in-depth look at all three cartridges. 404 Jeffery. Maximum cartridge overall length of 3.530 makes it a Magnum length cartridge. 543 at the base, at the rim. And right here where the shoulder starts, you got .530. You have an 8-degree, very gradual shoulder angle. And you have a very long neck, .624. That's a very long neck. Now, as the Hornady manual tells us here, the Jeffery uses a .423 caliber bullet. So it's actually a .42 caliber. 375 H&H Magnum. Now this is definitely a thinner, leaner Magnum compared to the Jeffery and especially the Rigby. 532 at the base, at the rim, and 448 at the shoulder. That's a pretty dramatic sloping. 15-degree shoulder angle, which is more than the Jeffery, but obviously not at anything like the Rigby. Neck length is around 0.35 or something like that. So it's actually a little bit less than caliber, but it's nothing terrible. But compared to the other two have really long necks, it definitely doesn't have a long neck. Its length just comes in the taper of the actual main part of the case. 3.6 overall length, and once again a little bit thinner, longer case. Notice the belt. This case was designed with a long, gradual sloping design to make it feed well, and it doesn't have much of a shoulder, and so really there's not a great place for it to headspace off of. And so that belt was created so that it would have a place to headspace. So it actually headspaces off the belt instead of the shoulder. 416 Rigby. Overall length is 3.750. That's definitely a Magnum length. Base is monstrous, 0.590. That's much bigger than the 375 H&H or the 404 Jeffery. Does have a decent amount of taper though. It's down here 0.540 at where it meets the shoulder. Still pretty big. Has a pretty long neck, 0.498. It's not long in relative comparison to the Jeffery, but it's still really long compared to the caliber. Definitely interesting is that shoulder angle. When you think of a steep shoulder angle, you might think of a Nosler, WSM, or 284 case with that 35-degree shoulder angle. Or you might think of the Extreme as being an Ackley improved shoulder angle with a 40-degree, but this is a 45-degree shoulder angle. And this is such a big caliber to go from the case to the neck diameter at 45 degrees is not much of a shoulder at all. This is the big boy. This is a massive case. All right, so you can see how they compare with each other and kind of their specs. Now in this video, I'm not going to go over the amount of energy and velocity that they produce, though it was massive, obviously enough to take elephants and rhinoceros and Cape buffalo and all the biggest game species in the world, at the expense, of course, of heavy recoil. And a lot of these rifles were designed to be very rugged, very stout, able to take that recoil. Also on the heavier side, so as to not put as much pain onto you as possible. But today I want to talk more about just the lineage of these cartridges. Now, if you're a casual gun nut kind of like me and you just like this stuff and you just enjoy talking about it, reading about it, you've more than likely heard of the Rigby and the Holland Holland. You may or may not have heard of the 404 Jeffery. And one primary reason for that would be it's not really except until recently that the Jeffery has been the inspiration to produce Magnum cartridges. Right around the turn of the 21st century is really when that started to happen. But the Rigby and the Holland Holland cartridge goes back, 40s and 50s on up, was companies like Winchester and Remington and Weatherby creating cartridges based off of those two parent designs. But like I said, more recently, the 404 Jeffery design has also been copied. And I'm going to go through that list here in a second and kind of tell you some of the cartridges that you know and love today. Might be your favorite big game hunting rifle. You might even use it in Africa, and you may or may not have known it came from one of these three cartridges. In fact, to find a modern day Magnum cartridge that's not from one of these three is going to be tough. You're probably going to go down the route of the 375 Ruger, which spawned all the PRC cartridges and the RCM cartridges. But really, they all come from one of these three cartridges. These are the three grandfathers of Magnums. Now we're going to start with the 404 Jeffery. As I mentioned, it's been a more modern thing for companies to use that case as their parent case. So have you heard of the RUM cartridges, the Remington Ultra Magnum, Winchester Short Magnum, Winchester Super Short Magnum, the SOM cartridges, the Remington Short Action Ultra Magnums, the Nosler cartridges? If you have, really all of these in one form or another came from the parent case of the 404 Jeffery. Now before you comment, I understand it's not exact and the geometry is a little different and the dimensions are not exact, but you can tell it's very clear that all these cartridges did come from that 404 Jeffery. So just to start out, there was a 280 Jeffery and a 333 Jeffery, which I know very little about, but they were neck down versions of the 404. But here are the notable children of the 404. The 300 Remington Ultra Magnum, the 300 Short Action Ultra Magnum, the 300 Short Mag from Winchester, the 223 Winchester Super Short Magnum, and the 26 Nosler. The 26 Nosler is kind of a standard length 30-06 case, but kind of based off that 404 Jeffery. The RUM is more of a Magnum length size, so it's very similar to the original Jeffery, just modernized, different shoulder angles, different taper. And then the SOMs, the WSMs, and the WSSMs, the same thing but just shorter. You know, just a much shorter version of it. Basically just cut off the 404 Jefferys at different points, and there you have a different family of cartridges. So subsequently, based off of those children, here are the children of the children, so to speak. The 7 Remington Ultra Magnum, or RUM, the 338 RUM, the 375 RUM, the 7 Short Action Ultra Magnum, the 27 Nosler, the 28 Nosler, the 30 Nosler, the 33 Nosler, the 270 WSM, very modern cartridge, the 6.8 Western, the 7 WSM, the 325 WSM, and then the shortest of all, the 243 WSSM and the 25 WSSM. So a lot of your more modern Magnum cartridges have came from that 404 Jefferys, which is pretty cool. Next, we're going to go to the 375 H&H. Now, if you think the 404 Jeffery had a lot of children, get prepared for the 375. Now, there was a 275 H&H and there was a 300 H&H. But here are some of the notable children, starting way back in the 40s and 50s, that were created from the 375. The 458 Winchester Magnum, the 7mm Remington Magnum, the 358 Norma Magnum, the 8mm Remington Magnum, the 270 Weatherby, the 300 Weatherby, and then subsequently, based off those cartridges, we have the little bit shorter 6.5 Remington Magnum and 350 Remington Magnum, the full-length 7 Shooting Times Westerner, which is based on that full-length 8mm Remington Magnum, the 416 Remington Magnum, same thing, 308 Norma Mag, and then you got your 338 Winchester Magnum, your 264 Winchester Magnum, and then later your 300 Winchester Magnum, all coming from that 458 in a little bit different form or fashion. That standard length action 270 Weatherby, that's where you get your 257 and your 7mm Weatherby as well. And then with that longer full length 300 Weatherby, you also have your 340 Weatherby and your 375 Weatherby. All right, and then on to the 416 Rigby. This is the big boy. This is the biggest of the three, okay? You do have a 450 Rigby, a 300 Lapua Magnum, a 338 Lapua Magnum, a 450 Dakota, and you have a 378 Weatherby, okay? Now, we talked about how a lot of the Weatherby cartridges came from the H&H and have that belt. However, the biggest Weatherby cartridges come from the Rigby. So spawning from the 378 Weatherby, you have your 30 378 Weatherby, your 338 378 Weatherby, your 416 Weatherby, and your 460 Weatherby, even though they did put a belt on that particular cartridge. It comes from the design of the 416 Rigby. So talk about shock and awe. Pretty much all, except for a handful, of your Magnum cartridges that we still use today came from one of those three granddaddies. All right, so just some final thoughts. I live in Missouri. I hunt whitetail deer. I have no need for 99% of these. There's a few of these here, like, you know, a 7 rim mag or a 264 that would be just fine for deer. But the theme of all these cartridges are bigger, more powder, therefore more power and more energy. So I guess the theme would be, when referring to cartridges, go big or go home. Or maybe go home with a big trophy. Now, my personal opinion on the design of the cartridge, I would prefer a non-belt. So I would lean more toward the 404 Jeffery or 416 Rigby design style. And then I just generally like more efficient cartridges, so a little bit smaller cartridge case would be better. The original 404 Jefferys, though it's a cool and iconic and historic cartridge, definitely has been improved by more modern cartridges. Of the ones we've talked about, I think the 300 WSM and the 6.8 Western are two incredibly awesome designs based on that 404 Jeffery. But you can't really argue with cartridges like the 7mm Remington Magnum, the 300 Weatherby Magnum, the 300 Winchester Magnum. I mean, there's so many phenomenal cartridges that have come from the 375 H&H and do use the belt to headspace off of. So props to the 375 for just being really cool and really awesome and being copied that many times. And then the Rigby is just enormous. So a lot of times in our modern day, we talk about big cartridges and big cases, and then we eventually get up to like the 300 Ultra Magnum, and that kind of seems like the biggest case, but really the one that's bigger than it is the 378 Weatherby style, or which comes from the Rigby. So that Rigby case really is the top of the food chain when it comes to big hunting cartridge cases. And I understand that compared to like the 50 BMG, that it's totally different. The 50 BMG is much bigger, but that was not designed to hunt with. It was designed to destroy, you know, tanks and boats and all kinds of things like that. But for a game hunting cartridge, really that Rigby cartridge is top dog. It's the big one. And I do have a soft spot for it. I really do like the Rigby case with that 45-degree shoulder angle. And just, I mean, I really think that Rigby was thinking, you know what? We're going to make the ultimate cartridge here as far as power. So I would love to hear your comments. Do you have one of these three original? You probably don't have a 404 Jeffery. I'm guessing that some of you definitely have a 416 Rigby or a 375 Holland Holland. I'd love to know your thoughts on those cartridges, your experience with them. But specifically, what do you consider the best? I would love it if you'd put in the comments your top 5 favorite or what you consider to be the best cartridges that I listed off here that are children of those original 3. So of all the children of those 3 cartridges, rank them from 5 to 1. What do you think are the best Magnum cartridges based on those original ones? Hopefully you have drank some coffee with me and enjoyed this video. If you have, give it a like. Share this video if you think it's worth sharing. Subscribe or follow me for more content like this. And until next time, I hope you have a great day and take care.